That's humans.
We're on Exodus 13. Last week we saw the death of the firstborn, and then the Passover was put into effect. Here it just continues on with it, and said, And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Sanctify unto me all the firstborn, whatsoever openeth the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and beast, it is mine. So here it's still representing why he asked, why the firstborn. He's trying to show them a little bit that the firstborn, and if you'll turn one of the fans on, you can.
Oh, it's okay, I'll do this.
That it was representing,
When I clean the church.
it was representing the firstborn to, the ones that died was the firstborn. Here he's saying you need to set aside your firstborn of the children. Then he goes on a little further. It says, whatsoever openeth the womb. A little further down, he even goes a little further. But consecrate, said, could mean sacrifice, as the old gods did, the other gods of Egypt and all those others. But here it says it merely consider as belonging to God, set apart, to consecrate, to set apart, set that apart. We see that in the Samuel, when Hannah was, praying for a child, and she said, okay, if once the child's weaned, I'll bring him back. And he was consecrated to God, and he went back and sat with the prophets, Eli and the brothers, and that's where God revealed unto him, who he was. Because at that particular time, they were just more or less acting. They were the head, acting as heads only. And Samuel went on to be one of the great prophets. But it says, it is mine. He set these forth, it is mine. First, because Israel was God's firstborn. Okay, he set up the children of Israel as his born, and this honored that fact. And because the firstborn was thought to be the best, and the best was always given to God. That's what we do in our tithe, that we say, we give the first tenth that we have from our income to tithe. Israel had been saved through the destruction of Egypt's firstborn, and now they were required to dedicate their own firstborn as a constant memorial of their deliverance. And then it goes on and says, Moses said unto the people, Remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage, for by strength of hand the Lord brought you out from this place. There shall be no leavened bread eaten. This day came ye out in the month of Aviv. And it shall be when the Lord shall bring thee into the land of Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he sware unto thy fathers to give thee, a land flowing with milk and honey, that thou shalt keep this service in this month. 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, and in the 7th day shall be a feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days, and there shall be no leavened bread be seen with thee, neither shall there be leaven seen with thee in all thy quarters. And it's putting this into remembrance of them, of what happened. Remember, they had the Passover meal that evening. The angel came over and destroyed the firstborn that wasn't covered by the blood on the lintel, in the doorposts. And then for 7 days, he said, don't eat any leavened bread, eat only unleavened bread. And then at the end of that time, there's another feast. That's 2 feasts that they had in a week. Okay, and the first one is they're talking about the first of the year. Remember, he said this shall be the new year for you. This shall be the new day. He resets their calendar for them. And so this is 2 feasts. One, it's kind of like our Christmas and New Year's, how they're a week apart. Okay, it'd be very similar to them. They had 2 festivals, or two holidays. It's not really a holiday, but 2 festivals, feasts that they had at the first of their year. And it's all to commemorate this leaving Egypt. And they had, it's not just the hard times, like it said. They had a feast at the end. That way, it was also for them to remember it was a good time, because they were leaving Egypt. And they were remembering how. And then it goes on and tells them, do this because of your children, okay? Verse 8, and thou shalt show thy son in that day, saying, this is done because of that which the Lord did unto me when I came forth out of Egypt. And it shall be for a sign unto thee, unto thine hand, and for a memorial between thine eyes, that the Lord's law might be in thy mouth, for with a strong hand hath the Lord brought thee out of Egypt. Thou shalt keep therefore this ordinance in his season from year to year. Talks about there that they should keep it upon thine hand, it shall be a memorial between thine eyes. It's talking about the little box that the priests wore. They would wear it on their hand or on their forehead that had little scriptures written in it. And it was later on, we'll see in the laws that's given, that that's to help them, remind them of these stories, remind them. They can't have the whole Bible on the back of their hand, but they can have certain things that they remember. In Jesus' days, he said, y'all make your phylacteries big. So the bigger the box, the better the ostentatious, you know. So they'd have grand big boxes on their hands or on their foreheads and go around, and they just totally didn't get what it was due for. It's like anything else. Bigger is better for them. They wanted it that way. But that's not what God wants. He's wanting a remembrance of these things. So it says God wanted the deliverance from Egypt to be constantly at hand and before their eyes, so they would always remember it. The Jews used this passage in Deuteronomy 6, 4, and 9, and 11, 13 through 21 to institute the practice of wearing the phylacteries like we talked about. In the end times, there will be a satanic imitation of this practice. I didn't think of this. When the number of the Antichrist will be applied to either the hand or the forehead. So this is kind of leading up. Whatever is set up as Christ, the Antichrist is going to try to mimic it. And that's what he's going to do. Unless you have a number that the Antichrist gives you on your hand or on your forehead, you're not going to be able to partake of anything, basically. Food, jobs, whatever, you know, he sets forth. And then it says that the Lord's law may be in your mouth. This shows that God did not command for literal boxes to be tied to the hands and the forehead, because to take it in this way means there should be a phylactery box to put in the mouth. So it's not really what they meant, but to be on your heart, to always be constantly before them, that they know why God sent them or brought them out of Egypt. Here it explains a little bit in verse 11 through 16 why the firstborn and how that's to be given. And it shall be when the Lord shall bring thee into the land of Canaanites, okay? Not yet, but when they get to the promised land, then this is what you need to do. As he sware unto thee to thy fathers, and shall give it thee, thou shalt set apart unto the Lord all that openeth the matrix, and every firstling that cometh of a beast which thou hast. The males shall be the Lord's, and every firstling of an ass shalt thou redeem with a lamb. And if thou wilt not redeem it, then thou shalt break his neck, and all the firstborn of man among thy children shalt thou redeem. And it shall be when thy son asketh thee in time of come, saying, what is this? That thou shalt say unto him, by strength of the hand the Lord brought us out from Egypt, from the house of bondage. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh would hardly let us go, that the Lord slew all the firstborn of the land of Egypt, both of man and the firstborn of beasts. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all that openeth the matrix, being males, but all the firstborn of my children I redeem. And it shall be for a token upon thine hand, and for frontlets between thine eyes, for by thy strength of hand the Lord brought us forth out of Egypt. So here he's talking about that of all the sacrifices that they can present. You remember, and it hasn't gotten there yet because the law hadn't been given, but it's what he talks about here is the lambs and the cattle, those things. You need to, it's firstborn. You need to sacrifice that to the Lord. If it's unclean, and it says about the ass, then you need to redeem it. That means you need to pay for it. And there was a certain amount that they associated with that being a firstborn. You need to pay into the offering, the church, to God for that. And you also are to do that for your children, to redeem them. It says, the firstborn of man among the children shalt thou redeem. So it's giving them to God, but also thanking God and giving him an offering for them. Okay, giving God, redeem them for him.
Okay, in verse 13, it says, every firstling of an ass thou shalt redeem with a lamb. And if thou wilt not redeem it, then thou shalt break his neck. So in other words, if it wasn't redeemed, they couldn't
have it,
keep it.
That's right. They're substituting a lamb for the ass because it's, and like I said, it's kind of getting ahead of itself a little bit because he hadn't given the laws, the clean and unclean yet. He had, but he hadn't. I mean, if you go back in the time, we see but he hasn't told them yet, you should eat only of the clean and leave the unclean alone. That particular time, early on, they wasn't eating the animals anyway. I'm talking about Adam's day, okay, until after the fall. Everybody was vegetarian, the way I understand it, so men and animals too. So they need to redeem it here with a lamb, or with a sheep, or a goat, like we talked about before. Something that is sacrificed to them. But you can't do that. That's why they're not going to do that. If you can't redeem it, you don't have any money, then you need to break its neck. That's given to the Lord. It's a sacrifice that you're giving. Sounds cruel to us, but it is. But that doesn't make it for the children. For the children, then you have to redeem with a price. And you could redeem it with the lamb also, I think. It doesn't read it there, but it talks about it in the commentary. Typically, they just redeemed it with money. And we said it says only, this is only to take place after they get to the land of promise. Because it was going to be originally a short journey, just a little over a month, about 40 days. We see they reach the promised land. But when they sent out the spies, the people wasn't ready to take the land. And we'll get into that in later scriptures. If the firstborn was unacceptable to sacrifice, and here it says if it was an unclean animal or a human, a substitute was offered to redeem the firstborn from God. If the firstborn was an animal, the substitute was a clean animal. If the firstborn was a human, it was money. That's typically the way they do it. And to set apart, or to says here, set apart or make them pass over, and understand the meaning as offer up a whole burnt offering. This is the sinister phrase used in 2 Kings 16:3 when Ahaz was sacrificing his own son to Moloch. So here again, they were twisting it. He thought Ahaz was thinking, I do this and I'm sacrificing to God and I'm doing good when he sacrificed his child, but the God he was serving didn't. I mean, but he wasn't serving the true God at that time.
There in verse 12 where it talks about, and every firstling that cometh of a beast which thou hast, the male shall be the Lord's.
Mm-hmm.
What took place with the females?
Females, at that time, here again, if they were the firstling, they weren't redeemed or anything. It had to be the first male. And it may not be the first one born, like we said before. Like we talked about, that the first child that comes along is not to be redeemed. It's just the first males. And that's setting up the hierarchy, the family hierarchy. People say, oh, that's sexist. Well, no, it's not, because the hierarchy here was that the male's going to be the leader of the family and should be the leader of the family. Not saying that the female is not worthy, But God said this, when he set it up and when he killed the firstborn, we talked about that because it was most like, it was the firstborn of the males. I think if we go back and look again. Any other questions? Then we'll go to 17. We talked about last week that they went to the town or the area of Succoth. And here it says, and it came to pass when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near, for God said, lest peradventure the people repent when they see war, and they return to Egypt. But God led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea, and the children of Israel went up harnessed out of the land of Egypt. So if you view Egypt, it's, right here in the middle, and if you go to the east a little bit, to the north is the Mediterranean Sea. So if you just follow that route up along you would run into the Philistines. But that's the closest way to get there. But God did not want them to do that, because the Philistines were very warlike. They'd been at war for years, and he did not want Israel to face them right away. So he led them east, straight east, and like we said, went around the top part, what we call the Gulf of Suez now, that left leg or western leg of that Red Sea, to pick up the men that was there, and then they continued on, and they were going on east, and that's when they run into the east leg here in the next chapter or two of the Red Sea.
So in verse 18, it says the children of Israel went up harnessed out of the land of Egypt. And my study area says in orderly ranks.
Right.
So they kind of had a set way that they went.
They did, and even the exit from Egypt, they were set up in certain ways that they moved. And it'll continue on in the next scriptures and let us see a little bit more about that. But
it wasn't just a hodgepodge of everybody coming and
no,
merging where they could.
They would go and they would move. In particular, when we're getting ready to talk about the cloud and the pillar of fire, pillar of in the cloud by day, they only moved when that moved. When that moved, when it stopped, then they would stop and set up camp. Now, they didn't, for the first while, and we don't know exactly when, they gave them comfort both to get away and get out of Egypt. They were moving for 24 hours a day, is what I would anticipate, because he told them they had that pillar of fire by night to see, and the cloud by day to lead them. And it led them to this time. Now, it took a while to get to where they're going to go, a couple 3 days to get over there. But then soon later, we see that when it stopped, then they would stop. So that God kept them as they were moving through this time period, whatever it was, they had rest. Now, if it was a certain, in one of them, like I read, it said they were 5 abreast, or it could have been 5 families abreast, or something like that, but they were moving in a particular order. One reason is going up the King's Way was a road. Going this way, there wasn't much, not so much. They were going through the wilderness. So they kind of, okay, let's stay this side, I can kind of see it. Don't go over there. We kind of already seen, or scouts seen, that's harder to go. Let's go over this way. So they'd move the people, this way or that direction, back and forth to kind of, as they were going, God would lead them. The pillar would lead them. And I don't know if it was the pillar was as wide as they should be. I can envision that it's 200 feet wide, 500 feet wide, whatever, and they'd fill that because they could get the light, and then they moved in that light. Or exactly what it was, we don't know. But we did see, it was, as you said, it was a man, it's harnessed is what it says here, but that means orderly direction. And they were constrained, is kind of what that means. They just did not everybody taking off.
Well,
Going around what?
I mean, people aren't cattle, but if you see a cattle drive or something,
Mhm.
a lot of times, they
Yeah.
put them in a certain,
Right.
you
There's
know,
riders on both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah. They corral the people or the sheep or the cattle or whatever they're moving. That's why it doesn't work too good with cats, because can't herd cats very well. But anyway, that commercial they have, that's funny. So, but anyway, they're trying. That's one way that they did, as they moved through. Verse 19 says, "And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had straitly sworn the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones away hence with you." Now Joseph was the one that came to Egypt first. And he told them when he died, I want you to take my bones back to the land of Canaan, to what was promised to my father and to my father's father, and that's where I want to be buried. So for 430 years, Joseph was not buried. His casket stood there, his burial, whatever it was, and he was second in command or third in command, whatever it was, of Egypt. And so he was high up. People knew of it and knew of him, even though it was still there. But after so many years, only the Israelites really cared, because he was Israelites. The Egyptian people kind of forgot about him, I'm sure. But the Israelites still had him. Wherever he was at in that particular area, they had him. His box at that time is just bones. But they took him back and followed that. So Joseph was prophesying 400 years ahead of time, you're going to take me back. Don't forget me here in Egypt. I don't want to be buried in Egypt.
Now, at the time, of course, that they did the Exodus, all the original 12 sons
Had died.
Right.
Correct.
And it was just grandsons and then great-grandsons.
Right.
And
Right.
families.
Yeah, and we don't know for sure if they were buried there or they went back to Egypt. After they forgot about Joseph, then I'm sure they were pretty well constrained to Egypt. They couldn't leave because they became slaves. Up until that time, I could see that, okay, some of them, they died and they said, okay, we're going to take them back to our lands. They may have took them back to the Canaan land, to the promised land. We really don't know. Only ones really told about is Joseph here. Now, Joseph may have instructed them that we don't have here, take all my brothers back with me, or anything else. But only Joseph is mentioned here. So we can't really say one way or another what it was. But that's a prophecy that he's telling them, it's going to happen. And it did. It was a reminder for the Israelites that they wouldn't always be in Egypt. Now, they may not have believed him, because 430 years is a pretty long time. I mean, really. But when Moses came along and the people started hearing about it, then they said, oh yeah, I remember Joseph said something about that.
And us even today, we can stand on God's promises.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it starts getting darker and darker and darker out there in the world.
Right.
If we'll stand on God's promises and believe that,
Mm-hmm.
they're going to come about.
It's going to happen. It may not be when we think it is, or in our time frame, in our lifetime, but it's going to happen. But we need to look forward to that.
So sometimes when you get discouraged, just remember, God's promises to us.
That's right. That's right.
That can encourage us.
Verse 20 says, and they took their journey from Succoth, that's what we were talking about earlier, and encamped in Etham, in the edge of the wilderness. Now, we don't really know where Etham is at, but we assume it's further east than where they were. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night, before from before the people. So we see here, is where I was referencing, they moved both day and night. Now I'm sure they took breaks. They stopped and, had to
They had
go
to
get
eat.
water and had to eat, like
Yeah.
you said, all these things. But they could take turns. If they had wagons, some of them could ride, some of them, wouldn't have to always be there. But anyway, they were constantly moving. As we said, it gave us the number of 600,000 last week of men. They think that's upwards of maybe 2 million people. That's a lot of people to move over a time frame, any time frame. Once you start moving at the front, it may be half a day before the back even starts moving. I don't know how that works. I mean, at a stoplight, when the traffic moves and that first car just sits there, you're kind of wanting to, hurry up, it's time to go.
Where's Claire for?
Yeah, and by the time you get there, the light's already turning red again, so it takes a little while for people to realize what's going on. But God showed his presence to Israel in a dramatic way by giving them constant assurance by this pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. It also talks about this as being the Shekinah glory. We talk about the light, the Shekinah glory of the Lord. That's what they say was most likely the fire by night, showing God's presence. The same thing that, we can see in other parts of the Bible, that we see that. And it tells in Psalms, David refers back to it and says, "For the Lord God is a sun and a shield. The Lord will give grace and glory. No good thing will he withhold from those who walk uprightly." So he's leading his people. As long as he's moving, as long as he's with them, he's leading them.
That had to be a comfort
Mm-hmm.
to them.
Mm-hmm.
We have the Holy Ghost now as our comforter.
Right.
And this presence that, in that cloud and that fire, that had to be a comfort for them.
Always there. It's like, okay, I'm not sure exactly when it appeared. They just tell us that it started here. If it started when it came out of Egypt, I don't see that, but maybe it did. Because they had to go at night. I would think it started right away, that, Moses and them, they said, be ready. And they had to be ready, and they started moving out of Egypt. I think that took a hold of them. And that probably gave the Egyptians a little pause to see that, because I'm sure they could see it too, as the children of Israel was leaving. Didn't take away the pillar either by day or night. It was always there, his visible presence with them. And that's all we have for tonight. Appreciate y'all coming out.
Good job doing that.
Thank you.
Yes, you did.
And I'll be ministering Sunday. I'll be teaching.